and then the gallery next to it. So this is Julia. So welcome and thank you so much for doing this. And thank you so much, everyone who has joined us and also everyone who has presented in the past. So go for it, Julia.
Well, thank you, Kate and Julie, for putting this together, for just setting this all up, and for that wonderful introduction. So yeah, as Kate mentioned, I am a self-taught herbalist. I've had several different teachers over the last decade, but no formal certifications or training. So a majority of the information in this presentation is going to share sort of how you might identify these plants and what some of the uses are, but truthfully, you really are going to want to talk to your healthcare practitioner or your naturopath or whoever you work with your health to see if these herbs might be right for you. And as Kate mentioned, again, this is more for purely entertainment. So a lot of what I will share is also going to be focusing more on the folklore of those plants. And yeah, so I would just like to take a moment, if you all are interested, in just sharing in the chat if you've worked with herbs before, what kind of herbs you use, or if you know nothing about herbs, and maybe even if that's not where you are, what drew you to this class. If you want to just take a moment to type that in the chat real quick, I would love to know what brought you here today. Cool. We've got some folks who are studying culinary herbs or doing hort therapy. We have someone who's studying to become a certified herbalist right now. That's awesome. Some folks are just familiar with basic culinary herbs. Awesome. Some folks have made herbal teas. This is great. So there's a lot of folks who have a lot of budding interests here and who know a lot already. So this is exciting. I hope that what I am sharing with you today is new and novel and exciting for you as well, and that you can take it home and use it in your own studies. Wow, this is great. There's so many of you here too. I was nervous when I heard that we were going to have a lot of folks here today, so I'm glad that we have as many as we do. Awesome. Kitchen witch. I love it. Cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go ahead and start sharing my my presentation. And I know that Kate mentioned to kind of hold your questions. If you have one that you want to share in the chat, I'll be looking at the chat box, and if I can answer it while I'm presenting, I will definitely try to. Otherwise, I think we'll take some time at the end of the presentation, and I will be able to answer some questions for you. So let me go ahead. All right. So a couple of other things I guess I also want to mention, or is worth mentioning, especially for those of you who are studying to be certified herbalists. I've already made a faux pas. As a self-taught herbalist, using the word medicinal can sometimes get you in a little bit of trouble because I'm not a practicing doctor, and so what I'm sharing here is not necessarily verified. It's all sort of based on folkloric and traditional uses that sometimes have modern applications. So just keep that in mind as I'm sharing this information with you. So yeah, modern herbalism has been informed by many different things, including folklore, old wives' tales. There's definitely a lot of occult usage, which I share a lot about as well in this presentation. and of course from varying indigenous wisdoms from all over the world. And as I mentioned, some folk tales and magic do not equate to your modern medicinal uses or your modern wellness uses, as I'm gonna use as the interchangeable word here. I focused, I tried to, there weren't always stories, but a lot of the stories I have here are coming from Irish, Italian, and Polish stories, because that's where my heritage is. And I feel like it's feels good to share that instead of cultures that are not mine and that I don't have roots inside of. But there's are many cultures that have varying tales on these plants. And so I encourage you to, look in your history, in your background, and see where your family comes from and how they told stories about those herbs as well, because it's it's fascinating how you can go from one part of the world that uses this plant and now it's naturalized in another area and they have all these other stories about it. And so it's just really exciting to delve into sort of your roots to really get a connection to those plants. And then just as a, I'm not Greek, but I think it's exciting to note that, a lot of modern medicine comes from the Greeks, and they believe that the gods were the first herbalists. So I just think that's a fun little fact too to share about where a lot of this comes from. So again, just I feel like it's really important to push this, that none of the information in these slides are intended to diagnose, cure, or prevent illness and sickness or disease. So please, if you decide you want to look for these herbs or forage for them, that you're using proper ID books and that you're also consulting your healthcare practitioners as well. So I picked 7 plants to try to discuss tonight based on my affinity towards them. They're plants I use particularly often in either daily ways or in food, or to celebrate certain holidays. I will bring these herbs into the picture. So that's where these herbs came from. They're also widely distributed across North America. So, it sounds like we've got a lot of folks from all over the country here, which is really exciting. So you may be able to find these plants while you're out in the field in your area as well. So we'll be looking at burdock, boneset, calendula, dandelion, black elderberry, nettle, Queen Anne's lace, skullcap, and yarrow. And we'll go ahead and jump right in. So the way that I've kind of laid this presentation out is we'll first go over the plant's range, their sort of preferred environments, harvesting techniques and uses very briefly, and then we'll get into the folklore of those plants. So the first one is burdock. And you'll note that the photos I have, a lot of them are not going to be exact life photos. They're going to be illustrations because I'm not trying to encourage proper identification right now in this particular conversation. But Artesian lapa is the greater burdock. We also have lesser burdock, which is Artesian minus, and both are considered wellness herbs. You can use them. There are purported benefits to that. They're native to Europe, but have been naturalized in most of North America, and in some cases are considered invasive. They are found in several regions, but predominantly in USDA zones 5 through 7. They're biennial, pollinated by bees and butterflies and moths. You'll find this plant particularly loves areas heavy in waste. And so a long time ago in England and in other areas, where they would throw their waste out the window, that's where you would find these plants growing pretty prolifically, is sort of exactly where that waste is. They're also really interested in growing in wet soils and water banks. They are also, they can grow in several different habitats, including semi-shade and sunny edges, but you're mostly going to find them on the edges and in like heavily populated areas where you're going to get a lot of just pollution. And interestingly enough, they're also considered detoxifying. So that's a cool little relationship that they have. While they're attracted to areas of waste, they also pull waste from the body. They're antimicrobial, antifungal. They've been considered used for many different skin conditions. You can use all the parts of this plant, which I find even more exciting, both fresh and cooked. And the roots specifically is what I use a lot. I'll make burdock bone. I'll put burdock in my bone broth a lot of times, and it's best used as a decoction, which is a overnight steep. For those of you who are familiar, I'm gonna try to really avoid using heavy language that is like in the realm of herbalism, just because not everybody might have that language. And I'll try my best to explain if I do happen to use a word that is not what we don't use a lot. Yeah, so then on to the folklore of burdock. It's a very exciting plant. So the Latin roots are arctos, which is where artemisium comes from, and that means bear. And then you have lapere, which means to seize. And we can see that a lot with why they might get that name from that burr that they have. If you look at the picture on the side, you can see where it comes from, where that name might come from. It's been known as batroot, beggar's buttons, and billy buttons by some. Those are just some other common names from areas around the world. And from my own heritage, I'm going to not say the Irish pronunciation of it, but one of the Irish stories from Ossian, when they talk about this plant, they make that phrase because it's like a burr clinging to the eagle's wing. And so in several countries in Europe, there is a festival called the Burryman Festival. And basically, this man, whoever is honored to be the Burryman that year, gets covered from head to toe in this Burryman in burrs, just burdock burrs all over their body, and beautiful flowers and other like adornments. And he's accompanied all around the town, and people will feed him whiskey or other drinks in his in this small little space of his mouth that he can drink. And it's supposed to be a really exciting time. A lot of folks believe that the Burryman is synonymous with the Green Man, who is this, great spirit and bringer of the spring in some pagan religions. So I have a picture in the next slide of somebody dressed up as the Burryman, but some other exciting things that I think are fun about burdock is burr sweethearts. So there's this saying that if you pick burdock burrs and you throw them at your sweetheart, if they stick to them, then their love is true. And if they don't stick, then you're out of luck. That person does not reciprocate their love for you. And some magical insights around this plant is that it's considered to ward off evil. And so a lot of times they would grind up the root and the leaves and make incenses and and use them in spells to protect against evil, and as well as for cleansing the self. So you can take like a burdock tea type bath, and that would, some believe that it would just sort of pull out all those negative thoughts that you would have either towards yourself or other people. the other thing about burdock that I've learned in my studies is that you can take the leaves and make love wishes. You like roll them up as you think about the person that you love, and put it under your pillow, and then supposedly your love will return their love to you. So it's a very sticky situation to get into with burdock. You can really either be loved or rejected with this plant. But I love it for its edible uses, and how I incorporate it into my meals. And that just reminded me, I guess I would also like to share that in the past decade of studying herbs and using them, in the past 3 to 5 years, I've moved away from teas and tinctures and supplements, and have gone more into incorporating these herbs into my everyday meals. And so I make a lot of different foods that will have these plants in it. Like I mentioned, the burdock bone broth I'll make a lot is a good one. So that's where I'm at these days with plants. It's a lot better to eat them than to like be forced to drink teas or tinctures. And so this is a picture of the Burryman. It's just such a beautiful, I mean, I can't imagine how hot they must be in that outfit, but that's what they walk around in. And it's a big to do in a lot of different towns in Europe and all over the country. So I really enjoy that story. And now we're going to talk about boneset. So boneset is another really exciting plant, Eupatorium perfoliatum. This one can be confused and for other plants, and additionally, boneset is a common name that's used for several other plants, including comfrey. So if you were to buy this plant, or if you were out in the field, you're really wanting to be very particular about how you're IDing this plant, because they do have different names for it. It's primarily found in the eastern United States. It's a perennial, prefers moist, wet conditions, in a variety of wetlands, and its blooms generally appear in late summer and early fall. This one is a really important plant because of the amount of species that both pollinate it and rely on it for food, which I think is important to note. There's like swamp sparrows and several different caterpillars that rely heavily on this plant. Um, and people have for many years. It Some of its benefits have been purported to help viral and bacterial infections, and stimulate white blood cells. It's considered a mildly tonic herb, and so usually it's made into a tea to treat colds and coughs, as well as constipation and fevers. You would be harvesting the leaves and the flowers of this plant, and they're usually dried, although in some cases you can use the leaves as a poultice, and so you would use that fresh. But because of its bitter, astringent taste, you usually are combining it with several other herbs to make it taste a little bit better. Um, so And Jen mentions that it looks great in background of home landscapes. It does look really good in a lot of landscapes. And the other exciting thing about many of these plants is that you can grow them in your home, in your backyards, in your landscapes, and they will be really beautiful and have multifunctions. And I'm all about multifunctional landscaping. So the folklore around boneset is interesting. I couldn't really find a whole lot from my own culture, but specifically here in North America, a lot of the indigenous folks who lived here, um, used this plant, especially when early settlers came, because there was a breakouts of dengue fever, which they called break bone fever because it would make people feel like their bones were literally breaking, which is part of where the name bone set comes from. Um, and the Latin name Eupatorium is actually derived from one of um, a king, King Pontus, who was well renowned for his herbal skill. And as far as magical uses go, this plant is particularly used to ward off hexes, especially ones that are pertaining to your poor health. Again, that's kind of where we got this is a really good herb for flus and influenza type health issues. It's also been known in the magical realm for protection, and people sprinkled infusions or teas around their house to ward off the evil spirits. And people would also make little, like, satchels, little pouches, medicine pouches, to carry with them, especially when they were traveling or if they were, working with money and they needed more money. This was a way that they would bring that into their lives, was by making these little medicine pouches and putting bone set in it. So this one, I don't use it a lot. Pretty rarely do I use this plant in food, but it's a nice one that I have in Lagoon Garden at my garden at the Chicago Botanic Garden. It's made its way into our landscape, so I enjoy seeing its white flowers from time to time. I'm sure you are all very familiar with calendula. It's one of my favorite flowers to use. I recently was making a calendula infused olive oil that I used on both salads and as a skin salve, and it's just a heavenly. I really enjoy it. It smells good. It's this deep, beautiful orange color, just a really beautiful plant to use. They're also known as pot marigolds or marsh marigolds. They've been naturalized in Northern Europe, and there are several wild species across the continents, but the medicinal species has been widely cultivated. So you'll find lots of different varieties that still have medicinal properties to them. It's an annual, so you'd have to plant it every year. But it's been known to treat muscle spasms, start menstrual periods, and reduce fevers, as well as I mentioned before, it's used as a skin tonic. And it's just all around a really, really great plant to use. I put it on donuts. I'll sprinkle the little flower petals on donuts and cakes and things like that. It's very, very nice to use. Calendula comes from the Latin word calende, which means first of the month. Um, and it's been known to be a visionary herb. So people use it to enhance their psychic and spiritual powers, whether that's by drinking tea, or some herbalists will just sit by that plant to sort of gather information from it. It's suggested to pick at noon if you wanted comfort or strength. Um, and so I really love birds. I love geeking out on them. And when I learned this, that if you touch calendula with your bare feet, you'll better understand the birds. You'll learn the language of birds. So I think that that's really exciting stuff. I don't know if I'll ever try that, but um, there's also, it's been used in like sleep protection and dreams. So people have put them under their bed, like strewn it under their bed to protect them from being robbed, but also to help dreams come true. Carol says it's good for adding to bedding of hens. Ooh, I'll have to use that in my chicken coop. That's an interesting one. Thanks, Carol, for sharing that. And I lost my slide there. Um, it has been said to give off bright sparks during thunderstorms, and bathing in calendula infusions was thought to give a healthy sunny glow, and it's probably from the very orange, deep orange infusion you get from that flower. And it would draw admiration and respect from one's community. So I thought that was really interesting to learn. And similar to marigolds, um, in the Mexican culture, they'll string them up and use them to honor their ancestors during Dia de los Muertos. You can also you can strew calendula around your doors to prevent evil from coming in. A lot of people back in the day thought there was so much evil in the world. They used plants to protect them from all kinds of evil all the time. So you'll see that as a common thread amongst most of these plants. They had wellness properties, but more often than not, they believed them to just be exorcising evil out of their houses or their bodies. So it's funny how we've moved from that thought. There's some great discussions going on in the comments too here. I'm sorry I can't keep up with all of them, but I'm not getting any questions right now. So it looks like keep enjoying those conversations with one another. Next is dandelion. And so I'm sure I'll get some folks here who know that dandelion is like number one plant, and other people will wish that you never said the word dandelion. So I hope I'm in good company when I say this is one of my favorite plants, and I have to fight with my partner's father to not mow the lawn because he always wants to get rid of the dandelions. As soon as there's a dandelion pop up, he's like, "We got to mow the lawn. We got to do it." And I'm like, "No, just let the chickens, let the chickens roam. It'll be fine." But it is pesky and it can get really annoying. But if you use it as an edible plant, then you're kind of, killing two weeds there. You're getting rid of the weed, and then you're also using it for yourself. It's really great to eat in salads. This one for sure, I will tell you with great confidence that you can eat both the flowers and the leaves of this plant, freeing two birds from one cage. That is a great reframe. Thank you, Andrea, for that. There are two different species, Taraxacum officinale, and I'm so sorry, but I'm blanking on the other Taraxacum right now, but both are considered edible. Surprisingly enough, there is a plant that this can be confused with. It's called Hypocaris. There's a couple of different species. Its common name is cat ears, but it's specifically different in that it has a thick stem, whereas dandelions have a hollow stem. So if you are foraging for dandelions and you're really not sure, that's one way to determine. And I'm sure most of you know this as well, but if you are foraging out in your local area, whether that's your neighborhood or somewhere where it is allowed, you just want to be mindful of how much you're harvesting, that you're sure it's the right species, and that it's not going to be, that it hasn't been sprayed. That's a big one with dandelions in particular. You'll never know if they've been sprayed in a backyard or not. So you just want to be careful with that kind of stuff. That's why I let them grow in my backyard, so I don't have to go to my neighbors and steal theirs. This plant is all over the world, all over America and Eurasia. It's a perennial, highly, highly nutritious. You can eat the greens cooked or raw. I've also used the dandelion heads and like sauteed them and battered them and had them as little fritters, which is really nice. There are some, the roots are also really great. I definitely have used dandelion roots again in bone broth as a tea on its own. I also see a question here from Jen about addressing interpreting uses and traditions of other cultures. And I'd be happy to chat more about that in a little bit, Jen. Um, so this plant is also considered an immune boosting plant. It's purported to aid in healthy liver, reducing cholesterol and lowering blood pressure. And as I mentioned, all parts can be harvested and eaten, even the root, although I wouldn't necessarily eat the roots raw. I would definitely dry them and use them as a tea personally. So similarly to calendula in some ways, and different in others, it was, I'm sure you've all heard, you pick the dandelion, you blow, and you make wishes on those dandelion heads. But instead of blowing the seed head for wishes, there's been folklore that says however many of those tiny little seeds that are left on the seed head are how many children you're going to have. So um, it's definitely one that I'd be interested in trying out. I haven't figured that one out yet. Haven't blown to see how many kids I'm gonna have, but folks have also used it in dream pillows and in sachets and charms as a sleep protection. Um, it's been said that if you bury the roots and this plant in the northwest corner of your yard, it's going to bring favorable winds as well as good luck. And it's been known for its healing and purification properties as well as defeating negativity, which probably is correlating to its antioxidant properties as well. So it's also been known to tell time. So when it's opening and closing, it's been used as a barometer, is another one. You can tell, some believe that if you look at a dandelion, you can tell if it's going to rain or if it's closer to the end of the day versus earlier in the day based on its opening and closing. So it's a clock to some and a weather predictor to others. So next time you're in your backyard and you see a dandelion popping out, try to guess what time it is and see if you're right. So elderberry is another one that we're gonna talk about. Sambucus canadensis is also known as the elder tree or American black elderberry, predominantly found in Northeast America as well as some parts of South America. It is a widely cultivated plant, so you will find varieties that you can buy that also produce edible berries, and it's actually really great to just have in your backyard because you can have a couple of different varieties that have bigger berries or smaller berries or different color foliage, and you need more than one to cross pollinate. So you can find a couple of different varieties to use. They usually are fruiting from August to September, depending on the species. And they're self-pollinating, but they'll cross-pollinate, like I said, with another elderberry if it's growing in the landscape. It has been touted around the COVID-19 arena as being something that's helpful to use. It's definitely an argument amongst herbalists around the country. That and echinacea were two highly debated plant medicines during the initial beginning of COVID, if it was good to use or not. The berries I wouldn't eat raw. They're very astringent and bitter. You usually want to cook them, and you'll usually find them in jams or jellies to have that better taste. And then it's been purported to reduce inflammation and boost immune system. I'm trying to look at these comments. There's some fun ones going on here. I'm getting a little distracted. But predominantly people just use the berries as the main source of its wellness properties. So elderberry comes from the Anglo-Saxon word "alb," which sounds like old, but it actually translates into fire. And it was used as a way to blow air into fireplaces because it had a hollow stem. And then it was also really used to create fire. It was great fire kindling. Um, I really like this plant because there's a lot of elven and fey lore around it. If you plant this tree in front of your kitchen, you like can um, speak to the elves and the fairies. They'll come and hang out in your home, and maybe that's not the greatest thing because they might start causing chaos in your house if you are into that kind of stuff. But they've been known as the gateway to those worlds. So be careful if you're sleeping under an elderberry tree. You might wake up with some fairies next to you in the morning. Um, Again, this plant has been considered to protect against evil and negativity, and also helped quell the temptation to commit adultery, supposedly. And then it was also used a lot in the rites of death. So when folks were transitioning into the afterlife, um, you would be sort of covered in elderberry, their flowers, their fruits, their branches to sort of help you in your transportation into the other world, which I think is quite lovely as well. This grandfather plant just protecting you as you go into the next world. So that's elder. Um, so if I was to tell you my favorite, um, if I was to tell you my favorite plant, it would be nettles. I use nettles for everything. Um, it's it has so many uses. It's infinite in its powers, and I usually am just drinking it as a tea. But I recently made nettle and yoki. It's really good for its color. It imparts a really deep, rich color on things, and it's just really tasty. So it's also known as common nettle. This plant can sometimes be confused for what's known as commonly known as snakeweed and also clearweed. So when you're harvesting this plant or searching for this plant, you're going to want to check for a couple of things, but in particular, it's the hairs on the plant that are going to determine that it's a stinging nettle. And with this one, you're going to want to be really careful. You're going to want to use gloves if you're harvesting this. And similarly to a lot of these plants, if you're not sure, if you've never worked with this plant before, you've never touched this plant before, you just want to be careful because sometimes we can get allergic reactions. I noticed somebody mentioned that they ate elderberries and they got some red spots. So you really want to just always be really cautious and use gloves or be just mindful when you're harvesting plant material because sometimes we can have negative reactions to them, both topically or internally, and nobody really wants that. This plant can be found all over the world, including North America, Asia, and Europe. It's a very important food source for several different butterflies and aphid species. And it's usually found in areas where there's a lot of heavy human population, which is both good and bad. I really have been trying to get a nice patch of nettle growing in my backyard, and it's very hard. The soil I have is not the greatest for it, um, but it's been said to stimulate hair growth, so people use it as a hair rinse. I particularly use it in food, soups, and teas and broths. The young leaves are the best. But it's also been used to make fibers. So it has a lot of different uses. The roots in particular can be used as a diuretic, so that's just going to encourage using the bathroom pretty regularly and just like getting your system flowing. And I don't know the answer to that, Joe, if it would be a good trap crop near your veggie garden since aphids like it. It's worth trying, but I'm not quite sure. And I would need to remember I don't remember off the top of my head what aphid species in particular it attracts. So that might be another caveat there if it's a good trap crop. I like that phrase. I usually just say sacrificial plant and throw it in an area and hope that that's where all the bugs go. And also, folks have used this plant's fresh leaves with the stinging hairs still intact to treat arthritis. And so, when using this plant, you'll harvest it and then you'll want to definitely cook it down before you ingest it so that you're not irritating yourself with those stinging hairs. So it's been said that this plant can protect from the mysterious elven folk. So let's say you fell asleep under that elderberry tree and now you got the fae folk all around you. You can use stinging nettle to get those elven folk away from you. And Carol mentions that fairy tales discuss weaving nettles as clothes. Yeah, fairy tales and just regular cultures have been using that material as well. It's stinging nettle can be burned as a purging or cleansing herb, similar to sage, which I think is really important to note that there are several herbs that are considered cleansing herbs, especially in the New Age realm. And a lot of them have very specific ties to indigenous cultures. And so if there's ever a time when you can use something that is of your culture or just not over harvested, I highly suggest it. And stinging nettle is one of those. Another one just randomly is like rosemary is another good one if you're into this kind of stuff. You can sprinkle a little tea or like dried leaves to remove any petty jealousies or envy you might have, or even just sort of remedy an uncomfortable situation by putting it in like a sachet or sprinkling it around your home as well. And nettle is to some degree a nervine, which is like a relaxing herb. And so that might be why some folks believe that it's great for aiding in the ability to handle emergencies. So it just sort of calms you down, helps you be level-headed, and sort of figure out how to manage through things, especially in those high stress situations. So that's nettle, and that's just like I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg on a lot of these plants. There's so much information out there, both folkloric and just medicinal as well. So, as I mentioned before, please explore and find those resources that light your heart on fire because there's so much to learn about these plants. Queen Anne's lace is my next one that I'm going to share with you. I have just a couple of more slides for you, just 2 more slides, so not much more to go. So Daucus carota, or otherwise known as Queen Anne's lace, can very much be confused for a lot of different plants. So this one is one that requires a bit more experience and probably a couple of ID books or a well versed herbalist to go with you because you don't want to be picking poison hemlock, for instance, is really the one you don't want to be picking. But it also has been confused for yarrow occasionally, wild parsnips, as well as angelica. It's known as wild carrot, also bishop's lace, Queen Anne's lace, and bird's nests. It's naturalized in North America and has predominantly in the European, the dang carrot family. Yeah, they do have such issues. They're so finicky and so many caveats with them. They are a perennial that blooms from May to late August. They really enjoy poor quality soils. So you'll find them on like roadsides and disturbed areas, um, especially like growing near highways. So not the ideal place to harvest them, but that's where you'll see them the most. And this is another one that I would highly suggest if you are sure it's that plant to wear gloves when you're harvesting it, because people have been known to get um, dermal rashes like dermatitis and reactions on their arms and legs and things like that. So you just really don't want to be picking that without protection. Um, the first year roots are the best edible part of the plant. After the first year, they get a little bit woody, but they really do taste like carrots. So if you're ever lucky to properly identify it and find a young one, you have a carrot substitute. Um, they're known to help with all kinds of intestinal situations, so cramping, gas, bloating. They've also been known to support the digestive, urinary, circulatory, and endocrine systems. Specifically, they've been used for kidney support, um, as well as, and I try not to speak too much on this because there's not a lot of research, but people have used it as birth control and also as forms of not having children. Not birth control, but they've used it as abortifacients, is what we've called them in the herbalist world. Highly would not recommend using them in that sense. There's not a lot of research that supports that. Um, So this one is fun. I just really like the little stories for this one. The Queen of England was an expert lace maker, and she was so hard pressed to make the best, most beautiful lace thing that she accidentally pricked herself, and a drop of blood fell into the center of her lace garment that she was making. And that is the key um, identifier, along with several others. But that's really the key identifier of how you know it's Queen Anne's lace, by that little red dot in the middle, which is her blood. Um, it's known to um, exude a sense of sanctuary, especially when it's like that upside down umbrella. It's like really safe for a lot of bugs and insects to hide under. And when it's dried, when it goes into seed, it's been known as the bird's nest. And there's like the story of the queen who she made the lace, and then she goes and travels, and then in her old age she becomes the bird watcher. And that's kind of the same evolution of Daucus carota itself, is that it will be, you know, this beautiful lovely lace, and then as it gets older it turns into this bird's nest. um, and that's when you want to harvest the seeds as well, and you're usually harvesting it on the first windy day nearest the full moon. That's when you want to collect those seeds. um, it's also been known as mother dye, and its superstition has it that if you bring this plant into your house, your mother would die. So I know people use it in bouquets and floral arrangements. So just be careful if you're going to bring that into your home. And then because it blooms from May to late August, a lot of times in villages along the the road from the palace to the villages, people would think, okay, the queen is coming. That they're all decorated and ready for her to come, and so that flowering during that time was significant of her, the preparation of her arrival. So, and there's a couple of queens. It's not always Queen Anne of England. There's also like Queen Anne of Denmark and a couple other Queen Annes that they believe is where this comes from. So All right. Actually, I lied. I have two more. So skullcap, Scutellaria latiflora, um, also known as mad dog skullcap. There are two species commonly seen in this area: the Bacal skullcap and the Virginia blue skullcap. Um, but if you're purchasing this herb either for home landscaping or just for your own use, you have to be worried because sometimes it's not always the straight species lateriflora. Sometimes they'll put another species in there. So you just want to find a reputable source and verify that it actually is that species, because some of the other ones don't translate to the same medicinal properties. It's native to North America. It's a perennial, and this one is a nervine. Again, something that's going to treat anxiety or just reduce your stress levels. It's been known to promote menstruation. And at one point in time, people believe this could treat rabies, which is where the name Mad Dog Skullcap comes from. Testing and trial and error have proved that wrong. It won't treat rabies. So definitely seek help if you think you have that. It can be used fresh or dried. You're harvesting the aerial part, so that's the leaves and the flowers. And excuse me, mostly this plant is used in teas and tinctures and as a rinse. Excuse me. So Um, women wore this plant, again, like it's natural, to keep their husbands faithful. Um, it was also put, like a pinch of it was put in a lover's shoe to keep them from being swayed or tempted by the charms of others. Um, it's been used in bath magic to sort of calm the aura and tensions, again, where it has those nervine properties. But it's also been used in initiations, especially those that are going to be consecrating vows or commitments or oaths. There's just this binding quality that people believed it to have as a plant. It was also used to burn. It was burned, I'm sorry, to sort of relieve any kind of uncomfortable situations or any disharmony, especially amongst lovers, but in a community or just in general. And then it was used in sleep pillows for relaxation and peace. And again, that's probably because it's a nervine and treats a lot of different anxiety disorders. All right, and this is the last one for the night. It's yarrow, which is another one of my favorite plants. Not as much as nettle. Nettle is my number one, but yarrow comes close second. So Achillea millefolium has been known. Scutellaria incana does not have the same properties, Jen. Thank you for asking that. That's why it's really important to look for the lateriflora because they're not synonymous. There are several species that don't contain the same constituents that the lateriflora does. So Achillea millefolium is also known as milfoil, soldier's woundwort, and nosebleed plant. Found all across North America, tons of different cultivars. Such a beautiful plant to use in the landscape. The straight species is usually a white colored flower, sometimes leaning with like a pinkish hue to it. Perennial with blooms April through September. As you can see with most of these plants, they're totally fine with disturbed soils, if not totally enjoy them the most. And this one can also be found in like grasslands and open forests. It was used to break fevers, cure stomach disorders, and has even been purported to be used as a poultice for rashes. It's said to stop bleeding depending on how it's used. Um, and the fresh young leaves can be used in salads. That's something that I like to use them for, is in salads. You can um, you can harvest all the parts of this plant, and it's usually made into teas and tinctures, but it's also been used as shampoos and salves. And you can use it fresh or dried. And it does have that extractive quality. So Joe here mentioned that they've used it to draw out splinters and for bee stings. So it has been used for sort of that extracting properties. And um, it was uh, used in a lot of different ways in folklore, including, again, just banishing negativity, warding off fear. There's also, it's been said to open up your psyche and psychic experiences. This is more of like another love plant. So it was used in like hand fasting and weddings, as well as in like marriage charms. So a newly married couple had 7 years of luck in the first 7 years of their marriage will be happy because they have this plant in a sash for them, and it sort of prevents any uncomfortable or upsetting experiences that might happen in the beginning of a relationship that you're just now getting married into. Um, and then again, it's also there's lots of different ways that you could put it into a medicine bag or a satch to sort of help you get over your fears, or just draw in love and promote more confidence and courage in your life. And it does smell amazing, Jen. Yes, you are correct. It's a very beautiful, beautiful plant. So, yeah. These are just some resources that I had online. I also have not enough hands for all the books that I have, and have used to study herbs and learn about the magical qualities as well as the folkloric qualities. So I'd be happy to share those with you. Just the few that I have right here. This one is called The Master Book of Herbalism by Paul Barrel. Really great resource, both on how the plants were used, um, you know, prior to modern day uses, as well as their folklore, and even magical uses. Um, Another one is Midwest Medicinal Plants by Lisa Rose. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, so um, always want to get my Midwest plants on. And then where I got most of my witchcraft and magical uses is from Witchcraft into the Wilds, which is by Rachel Patterson. And those are just a few. So I'd be happy to share more of those resources with you when, as Kate mentioned, when this recording goes onto the YouTube channel. So that's my presentation. Thank you for coming and listening to me talk. My email's down there at the bottom if you have any further questions or want to connect further. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them and answer them now.
Yeah, I would say thank you so much. That was so interesting. And yeah, please feel free to speak up and ask some questions. It was awesome. Um, I have a question. Someone mentioned the illustrations. Did you just get those from books? Like, what are your sources?
Oh, yeah. The all powerful Google. To be completely honest with you, I really just love botanical illustrations.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, they just came from Google, unfortunately.
No, that's fine. They're great. Beautiful. Um, does anyone else have any more questions? So there's still some in the thing. What?
Yeah, I see one here from Christy DiLorenzo. What other herbs are safe to burn or smudge with? I really like to use rosemary. Basil is another good one. Nettle, as I mentioned earlier, those are just a couple that I like to use as alternatives to some of the more popular smudging herbs.
Uh,
I had a quick question. Or do you want me to put it in the chat? Should we put it?
No,
you can
go ahead.
Good.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, because it seems like if you could just talk a little bit about this, because it's always been kind of like this gray area. No one's ever who really actually knows about herbalism. I've never gotten to ask someone. So could you just talk a little bit about when you meet someone and if you're helping them to find an herb to help them kind of with something, whether it's emotional or physical, how do you kind of start the conversation to get to know them so you know what plant? Because there's so many different plants that can help with something. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
You're talking about that feel, like what's your process?
That's a great question. So I try to look at the whole picture. And when I say the whole picture, what I mean is, so a person's coming to me and they're like, I have psoriasis and this is super annoying me and I really want to get rid of it. What herb do you have? Okay, you have psoriasis. How long? What have you been doing already? What medications are you on right now? Also, like, what is their diet like? What is their stress level like? What has anything changed in their life recently? Like, and as comfortable as your friend, your client, your whoever you're working with is willing to share with you, that's going to kind of help you learn more about what plants, because it's never going to be one plant, right? It's always going to be kind of a combination of plants. So what plants um, feel like they're going to be a good fit? And you'll get different answers from different people, but the more that you work with these herbs, my belief is that you'll create such a deep relationship with them that they'll start telling you, like, you'll hear the name, like you'll be talking to somebody and they'll be telling you all these things that are wrong with them, and like the plant that wants to show up is, you're going to hear it. And that might sound a little woo woo, but a lot of herbalists do work that way. And I think that it's really helpful to trust when you hear those things. Definitely, like, do the further research and make sure that that plant that's calling out to you is like actually going to be helpful to your client. But that's really how I work with my herbs, and when I am sharing my knowledge with folks, that's sort of how I try to balance out what I'm offering them. So I hope that helped you, Joe. Awesome.
There was another question about the flavor. Oh, someone answered it in their opinion. The flavor of the fresh yarrow leaf.
Yeah. And Jen is right. It definitely is like chamomile minty type taste, especially fresh. So it's up to you if you kind of like that, but you can always just nibble a little bit, see if you want to put it in your salad, or if you just want to use it cooked. Either way is quite nice, but it has a really nice smell to it, which does not translate to the taste, so don't be fooled by the way it smells. There was a lot of conversations going on earlier, but I didn't see any questions. So from M, do you have any recommendations on where to get herbs if we're unable to harvest in the wild? Yes. So number one favorite resource to use to get like high quality organic herbs is Mountain Rose Herbs. Founded by Rosemary Gladstar, one of the like primo queens of herbalism. She just a very reputable source. You're always going to find organic little bit on the expensive side, but it's in Oregon, and they have tons of like bulk herbs, and then also tinctures and other pre-made, prepared um, um, solutions for you.
I had a question. When you were talking about the yarrow, you mentioned the straight species. Is that kind of the rule of thumb for all of these herbs? Do the cultivars miss something in that cultivation?
Yeah, so with the exception of calendula, I would say most of these plants, you're gonna want to go with the straight species. The cultivars, some of them will lose their medicinal properties. So definitely, calendula is the only one that I would say you could get by with using a variety or cultivar of.
Thank you.
So Christy, it was mountain rose herbs. Yes, mountain rose herbs is the herbal resource for all of your wholesale needs. Definitely love her, and also any of her books. If you're wanting to learn more about herbalism, any book by Rosemary Gladstar is just, she has so much wisdom. Um, I never had the fortune of studying from her directly, but I did study under two of her students. And so just wealth of information. So yeah.
I have a question.
Yep.
That was an amazing talk. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome.
Thank you.
And I really love calendula, and I really want to try to make something with that. And you mentioned, was it like a skin cream?
Yeah, so I basically just pluck the heads of my calendula and then put them into an olive oil. And then you just shake that up every day for about a month until it's infused. And then you can, one of two things, you can either strain the herbs out or you can keep the flowers in. If you keep the flowers in, you run the risk of having it go rancid. So there's a nice time frame, about a month, I would say. And then you can use it for salads. You can use it to just rub on your skin. It's like a multifunctional concoction, and something that I really enjoy using a lot.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you. I'll try that.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions out there? And if there aren't any right now, that's okay. You can always email me if you find that you have a question later on.
If no one else does, I have one more.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Go for it.
One of the things that I always feel really guilty looking for, like spring ephemerals that are actually natives, that are like bloodroot. Like I think specifically about bloodroot because they're so problematic with when sourcing plants that are potentially threatened or native plants, do you just avoid using those plants at all?
Yeah, truthfully, I do. If I know that something is really over harvested, I look for alternatives. There are so many plants out there that have a lot of the same properties and a lot of the same constituents, that if I can find something that's not threatened or not going to be, it doesn't have the threat of over harvesting, then I'm going to go with the alternative, just because while bloodroot is such a not only is it romantic, but it's such a beautiful plant. I want to keep it in the wild and let people enjoy it and see it and let nature have it instead of taking it for myself. But you can also, in those moments too, like if you can find seeds or a reputable source that like grows those plants, then try growing it in your home and like creating a little patch or a little, sanctuary of it, because that's the other way that I get by with, if I can't find that plant, whether it's because it's sold out or whatever the case may be, I will try to grow it in my house. Yeah, and Mary says that she or they grow it in their home as well. And then some folks, with permission, will propagate them. So there are other ways as well that you can manage to get those plants. Well, this has been so fun. I'm really was so nervous about presenting to all of you, but this was just great. I hope you all enjoyed it. So thank you.
You were great. I just want to say a huge thank you from all of us and Women in Horticulture, and for presenting. And just like all of our other speakers, you're a volunteer, just like many of our people with Women in Hort. So you're spent your time and your energy and your knowledge to share it, which has been amazing. So if anybody has any other ideas for our speaker series, please feel free to reach out to womeninhort@gmail.com. Also, Julia, there's just amazing knowledge, and it was wonderful presentation. And thank you so much. And I know that I speak for everyone here that we've gotten people from all over the country and different countries, which was great. So that's the good thing about Zoom. But I'd love to go out with all you having a drink at the bar soon, every single one of you. But so thank you so much.